Rebecca Thompson never imagined that her search for love would lead her into the hands of a criminal organization that had perfected the art of turning hope into horror. At 34 years old, this elementary school teacher from Westfield, Indiana, boarded a flight from Chicago O'Hare International Airport to Lagos, Nigeria on March 15, 2019, believing she was about to meet the man who had spent 6 months convincing her he was her soulmate. Instead, waiting for her at Murtala Muhammad International Airport was not the charming British engineer she had fallen in love with online, but a kidnapping gang that had orchestrated every moment of their romance specifically to lure her across the world into their trap. What Rebecca's family discovered in the terrifying days that followed would expose an international criminal network operating with surgical precision, targeting vulnerable American women through carefully crafted online personas, elaborate emotional manipulation, and a systematic approach to kidnapping that had already claimed at least 6 victims over 3 years. The romance that had seemed too perfect to question was actually a business transaction. The love letters were scripts. The future they had planned together was fiction designed by criminals who studied psychology as carefully as they studied their victims' bank accounts. Rebecca Thompson's story is about the fatal collision between a woman's desire for connection and a criminal enterprise that weaponized that fundamental human need. This is the story of how one teacher's spring break vacation became an 11-day nightmare that would change her life forever and expose the dark machinery of international crime hiding behind the promise of love. Rebecca Thompson had always been the kind of person who saw the best in people. Born on June 12, 1985 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, she grew up in a middle-class family that valued education, kindness, and community service. Her father, Michael Thompson, worked as an accountant for a local manufacturing company for 30 years. Her mother, Patricia Thompson, was a registered nurse at Lutheran Hospital downtown. They raised Rebecca and her younger brother Daniel in a comfortable 2-story house at 412 Maple Grove Drive in Westfield, a quiet suburban community north of Indianapolis, where neighbors still knew each other's names and kids played in front yards without worry. Rebecca attended Ball State University in Muncie, graduating in 2007 with a degree in elementary education and a minor in English literature. Her professors remembered her as an earnest student who genuinely cared about making a difference in children's lives. She wasn't the top of her class, but she had something more valuable than perfect grades. She had heart. After graduation, Rebecca returned to Westfield and secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Westfield Intermediate School. For 12 years, she poured herself into her work. Her classroom walls were covered with student artwork, motivational posters, and photographs of field trips. She stayed late to help struggling students, spent her own money on classroom supplies, and was known throughout the school for remembering every child's birthday. Her personal life had been more complicated. In 2009, at age 24, Rebecca married Kevin Walsh, a pharmaceutical sales representative she had met through mutual friends. The wedding was small but beautiful, held at St. Maria Goretti Catholic Church with a reception at a local country club. For the first few years, the marriage seemed solid enough. They bought a small house, talked about having children someday, went through the normal routines of young married life, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to deteriorate. Kevin's job required extensive travel. He was gone 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes more. Rebecca threw herself into teaching, creating elaborate lesson plans and taking on extra responsibilities at school. They grew apart in the way couples do when they stop paying attention to the distance forming between them. By 2015, they were living parallel lives in the same house. Conversations became transactional, focused on bills and schedules rather than dreams and feelings. Rebecca suggested counseling. Kevin was always too busy with work. In early 2017, Rebecca discovered text messages on Kevin's phone that made it clear he had been involved with someone else for at least 6 months, a woman he had met during his sales trips to Ohio. The divorce was finalized in October 2017. Rebecca kept the house initially, but the memories were too painful. She sold it and moved back in temporarily with her parents at their home on Maple Grove Drive while she looked for her own apartment. The divorce devastated Rebecca in ways she hadn't anticipated. At 32 years old, she felt like she had failed at the one thing she had always assumed would come naturally to her: building a family, creating a home, finding a partner to share life with. She threw herself even harder into teaching, but the loneliness at home became overwhelming. Her colleagues noticed the change. Rebecca, who had always been optimistic and energetic, became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped attending school social events. She spent evenings alone in her new apartment on Westfield Boulevard, grading papers and watching television shows she didn't really care about. Her best friend since high school, Amanda Martinez, tried repeatedly to get Rebecca to go out, to meet new people, to start dating again. Amanda lived at 615 Ashford Lane in Westfield and worked as a dental hygienist. The two women had been inseparable since sophomore year, when they had bonded over a shared love of young adult novels and terrible romantic comedies. Amanda was married with 2 young children, and she hated seeing Rebecca so isolated and sad. They met for coffee every Sunday morning at a local cafe, and Amanda would gently push Rebecca to consider putting herself back out there. "You're beautiful, smart, funny. Any man would be lucky to have you." But Rebecca resisted. The wound from Kevin's betrayal was still too fresh. The idea of trusting someone again felt impossible. Her family worried too. Daniel Thompson, her younger brother by 3 years, lived in Indianapolis at 2847 Brookstone Avenue with his longtime girlfriend. He worked in IT for a financial services company and made a point of visiting Westfield every few weeks to check on Rebecca. Daniel had never particularly liked Kevin, and he was secretly relieved when the marriage ended, but he was concerned about Rebecca's growing isolation. Their parents, Michael and Patricia, were supportive, but didn't quite know how to help their daughter navigate this chapter of her life. They had been married for 37 years and couldn't fully understand the particular pain of divorce, of having your partnership dissolve before you'd even had children or built the life you had planned. By late 2018, Rebecca's emotional state had improved somewhat. She had been in therapy for several months, working through the grief and self-blame that had consumed her after the divorce. She was sleeping better, eating regularly again, finding moments of genuine happiness in her work with students. But the loneliness remained. She was 33 years old, living alone, coming home to an empty apartment every night. She wanted connection. She wanted to feel valued by someone again. She wanted to believe that love was still possible for her. These desires, completely normal and human, would become the tools that criminals would use to destroy her sense of safety and trust forever. Her colleagues at Westfield Intermediate School would later describe Rebecca as someone who wore her heart on her sleeve, who believed in second chances, who always looked for the good in people even when evidence suggested otherwise. Lisa Chen, a 5th-grade teacher who had worked down the hall from Rebecca for 5 years, remembered conversations where Rebecca talked about wanting to find someone but being afraid of being hurt again. She was vulnerable in a way that made you want to protect her, Lisa would later tell investigators. She trusted people. She believed what they told her. In another context, those qualities made her an excellent teacher. In the world of online romance scams, they made her a perfect target. In October 2018, Rebecca made a decision that seemed harmless at the time, but would set in motion a chain of events that would nearly cost her life. Encouraged by Amanda and hoping to break out of her isolation, she created a profile on an international dating platform called Global Connections. The website marketed itself as a place for educated professionals seeking serious relationships with people from around the world. Rebecca was attracted to the idea of meeting someone outside her immediate social circle, someone who didn't know about her divorce or her small-town life, someone with whom she could start completely fresh. She spent several hours carefully crafting her profile. She used a recent photograph taken at a school event where she looked relaxed and happy. She described herself honestly, a teacher who loved reading, hiking, and trying new restaurants, even though Westfield didn't have many. She was open about being divorced, but framed it as a learning experience rather than a failure. She specified that she was looking for someone serious, someone kind, someone ready for a real partnership. Within days, she had dozens of messages from men around the world. Most she ignored. They seemed insincere or immediately sexual, but one message stood out. It came from someone named David Thompson, and everything about his profile suggested he was exactly the kind of man Rebecca had been hoping to find. His photograph showed an attractive man in his late 30s with dark hair graying slightly at the temples, kind eyes and a warm smile. In some photos, he wore professional clothing, standing at construction sites wearing a hard hat and safety vest. In others, he was dressed casually, smiling at the camera in what appeared to be various African and Middle Eastern locations. His profile stated that he was a British civil engineer specializing in sustainable infrastructure projects in developing countries. Originally from Manchester, he had spent the last decade working on projects across West Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. He was based in Lagos, Nigeria, managing a water purification initiative funded by international development organizations. His message to Rebecca was thoughtful and personal. He mentioned specific details from her profile, noting that they shared a love of books and that he admired teachers because education was the foundation of everything he tried to accomplish in his development work. He wrote with a slight formality that Rebecca found charming, as if English was his first language, but he had been away from Britain long enough to adopt a more international way of expressing himself. He asked intelligent questions about her work, about what she loved about teaching, about her favorite books. There was nothing aggressive or inappropriate in his message. It felt like the beginning of a genuine conversation. Rebecca responded cautiously but positively. Over the next few days, they exchanged several messages through the dating platform. David asked about her life in Indiana, about what a small town in the American Midwest was like for someone who seemed thoughtful and curious about the world. Rebecca found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone since the divorce. She told him about her marriage ending, about feeling stuck in her hometown, about wanting something more than the predictable routine her life had become. David responded with empathy and shared his own story of a failed engagement years ago, a relationship that had ended when he had chosen his career over settling down in England. He described the loneliness of constantly moving between project sites, of hotel rooms and temporary housing, of having no real home base. Within 2 weeks, they had moved their conversations from the dating platform to WhatsApp, where they could message more freely and share more photographs. David sent pictures of the water purification project he was managing, showing massive tanks and complex filtration systems, explaining the technical challenges of bringing clean water to communities that had never had reliable access before. He sent photos of Lagos, the sprawling metropolis with its mix of gleaming modern buildings and densely packed neighborhoods, its traffic and energy and chaos. Rebecca sent pictures of Westfield, of her classroom, of the autumn leaves in Indiana, of her family's home where she had Sunday dinners. By November, they were talking every day. David would message in the morning, Nigerian time, which was late evening for Rebecca. They would have long text conversations while she made dinner or graded papers. On weekends, they would have voice calls that sometimes lasted for hours. David had a pleasant British accent that made everything he said sound sophisticated and worldly to Rebecca's Midwestern ear. He talked about places he had been, Egypt and Jordan and Malaysia, describing markets and ancient ruins and street food with the detail of someone who had truly experienced them. He asked about Rebecca's life with genuine interest, wanting to know about her students' progress, her family's dynamics, her hopes for the future. What Rebecca didn't know was that the man she was falling for didn't exist, at least not in the way she imagined. David Thompson was a carefully constructed fiction created by Emmanuel Okafor, a 31-year-old Nigerian man operating from an internet cafe at 23 Awolowo Road in Ikeja, a bustling commercial district of Lagos. Emmanuel had never been to Britain. He had never worked as an engineer. The photographs on the profile were stolen from the social media accounts of a real British engineer who had no idea his image was being used to deceive women across the Atlantic. The construction site photos were publicly available images from international development projects that Emmanuel had found through simple internet searches. Emmanuel Okafor was a professional romance scammer who had been operating various schemes for nearly 5 years. He worked from the internet cafe most days, arriving around 10 a.m. and staying until late evening, managing multiple fake identities simultaneously across different dating platforms and social media sites. At any given time, he was conducting conversations with 10 to 15 women, mostly Americans and Europeans, using different personas carefully tailored to each victim's apparent vulnerabilities and desires. For some women, he was a widowed doctor serving in a refugee camp. For others, a successful businessman recently relocated to West Africa. The David Thompson persona, the British engineer, was one of his most successful creations, sophisticated enough to attract educated professional women who might be more skeptical of cruder scams. Emmanuel's operation was systematic and psychologically sophisticated. He studied each woman's online presence carefully before making contact. He read their social media posts, looked at their photographs, noted what they shared about their lives and relationships. He identified emotional vulnerabilities, recent divorces or losses or disappointments, signs of loneliness or desire for change. He crafted his initial messages to respond specifically to what each woman seemed to need. For Rebecca, who was clearly intelligent and idealistic, but wounded by her failed marriage, he created a man who was worldly and accomplished but emotionally available. Someone who understood disappointment, but remained hopeful about love. The conversations Emmanuel conducted with Rebecca followed a pattern he had refined through dozens of previous victims. First, establish trust and emotional connection through seemingly authentic conversation. Share details, both true and false, that create a sense of intimacy and mutual vulnerability. Express interest in the victim's life. Ask questions. Remember details. Make her feel truly seen and valued. Second, create a narrative of unfortunate circumstances that prevent easy communication or meeting. In David's case, the demanding nature of his work in remote areas, poor internet connectivity at project sites, the complexity of coordinating schedules across time zones. This explained why they couldn't video chat more frequently, or why his responses were sometimes delayed. Third, slowly introduce the idea of a future together, making plans, building dreams, creating emotional investment in a relationship that has never involved physical presence. By December 2018, Rebecca Thompson was deeply emotionally involved with David Thompson. They had been communicating daily for 2 months, and what had started as simple attraction had developed into something Rebecca believed was genuine love. David told her he was falling for her, that he thought about her constantly, that she had brought light into his life in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Rebecca, starved for affection and validation after her divorce, responded to these declarations with her whole heart. She told Amanda that she thought she might have found something real, something special. Amanda, concerned but wanting her friend to be happy, urged caution. "You've never met this man in person. How can you really know who he is?" But Rebecca was defensive. She knew him through their hours of conversation, through the vulnerability he had shown her, through the way he made her feel understood and cherished. What Rebecca couldn't see was that every word David said to her had been calculated for maximum emotional impact. Emmanuel Okafor was not interested in Rebecca Thompson the person. He was interested in Rebecca Thompson the target, a lonely American woman with a stable job, modest savings, and a desperate desire to believe that love was still possible for her. The affection he expressed was performance. The future he described was fiction. The connection she felt was manufactured through psychological manipulation techniques that Emmanuel had learned from other scammers and refined through his own experience. Rebecca thought she was building a relationship. Emmanuel knew he was setting a trap. In January 2019, the dynamic of their relationship shifted in a way that should have alarmed Rebecca, but instead seemed like a natural progression. David began talking more specifically about their future together, about wanting to meet in person, about the possibility of Rebecca visiting him in Lagos, or of him taking time off from his project to visit America. Rebecca was thrilled by these conversations. The idea of finally meeting the man she had been falling in love with for 3 months seemed like the validation of everything they had shared. But there was a complication, David explained. His contract with the development organization was extremely demanding, and taking time off required months of advanced planning. The window for him to travel to America wouldn't open until late summer. But if Rebecca could come to Lagos, he said, they could meet much sooner. He would show her the city, introduce her to his work, and they could finally be together in person. Rebecca was initially hesitant about traveling to Nigeria. She knew very little about the country beyond news stories that tended to focus on corruption, poverty, and violence. She expressed these concerns to David, who responded with patient reassurance. Lagos is like any major city, he told her. It has dangerous areas, yes, but also safe neighborhoods, beautiful beaches, excellent restaurants, vibrant culture. He would ensure she stayed in secure accommodations and would be with her the entire time. More importantly, he said, if she came to Lagos, they could spend real time together without the pressure of him visiting America and meeting her family before they had even established that they were compatible in person. It made sense, he argued, to meet on neutral ground first. The suggestion planted itself in Rebecca's mind. Over the following weeks, David continued to gently encourage the idea. He sent her photographs of Lagos that emphasized its modern aspects: luxury hotels along Victoria Island, upscale restaurants, gleaming shopping centers. He described in detail the plans he was making for her visit, the hotel where she would stay, the places he wanted to take her, the romantic dinners they would share. He painted a picture that was both exciting and reassuring, an adventure but a safe one, carefully controlled by someone who knew the city and could protect her. By early February, Rebecca had made her decision. She would travel to Lagos during her spring break in March. The school district's spring break was scheduled for the 3rd week of March, giving her 9 days away from teaching responsibilities. She told David her decision, and his response was overwhelming joy and gratitude. He immediately began helping her plan the trip, explaining the visa requirements, suggesting flight options, recommending that she stay at the Echo Hotel and Suites on Victoria Island, one of Lagos's most prestigious hotels. He said he would cover the cost of her hotel stay as his gift to her, his way of thanking her for being willing to travel so far to meet him. Rebecca's family and friends had very different reactions to her travel plans. When she told her parents, Michael and Patricia Thompson, that she was planning to visit Nigeria to meet a man she had been talking to online for 4 months, their response was immediate concern. "Nigeria," her father said, his voice rising with worry. "Rebecca, that's not safe. You don't really know this man. What if something happens to you?" Rebecca tried to reassure them. David was a British professional working on legitimate development projects. She would be staying at a 5-star hotel. She wouldn't be wandering around alone. She would be careful and stay in contact with them throughout the trip. Her brother Daniel was even more alarmed. He spent an evening researching romance scams and Nigerian fraud schemes, then called Rebecca to share what he had learned. "Do you realize how common this is?" he asked her. "Scammers create fake profiles, build emotional relationships with women, then lure them to Nigeria where they're robbed or worse. Have you video chatted with this guy? Have you verified anything he's told you?" Rebecca admitted that their video chats had been limited. David said the internet connection at his project site was unreliable, but they had talked on the phone many times. She knew his voice. She had seen photographs. Daniel's skepticism made her angry. Why was everyone so determined to ruin this for her? Why couldn't they just be happy that she had found someone who made her feel valued and excited about life again? Amanda Martinez was also deeply concerned but tried to be supportive while expressing caution. "If you're really going to do this," she said, "then you need to take precautions. Share all your flight information with family. Check in regularly. Don't go anywhere alone with him at first. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, get out immediately." Rebecca agreed to all these conditions, but privately she thought everyone was overreacting. David had been nothing but kind, thoughtful, and respectful for months. Their connection was real. She could feel it. At Westfield Intermediate School, Rebecca mentioned her travel plans to Lisa Chen during a break in the teacher's lounge. Lisa, who had traveled internationally more than most of their colleagues, was immediately worried. "Nigeria is a challenging place even for experienced travelers," she told Rebecca. "Going there alone to meet someone you've never met in person, that's extremely risky. Have you thought about meeting him somewhere else first? Maybe he could come to the US, or you could meet in a neutral third country." Rebecca explained David's work constraints, his contract obligations, his inability to travel to America until later in the year. Lisa listened but couldn't shake her unease. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said. "And if anything feels off, don't worry about seeming rude or paranoid. Just get to safety." Despite everyone's concerns, Rebecca moved forward with her plans. She purchased a round-trip ticket on United Airlines from Chicago to Lagos, departing March 15th and returning March 24th. She applied for and received a Nigerian tourist visa. She got the required vaccinations for yellow fever and other diseases. She shopped for conservative clothing, appropriate for a largely Muslim country, modest dresses, and long skirts that would help her blend in and show respect for local culture. She read travel guides about Lagos, learning basic phrases in Pidgin English, studying maps of the city, researching cultural norms and safety tips. In her conversations with David throughout February and early March, everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. He confirmed that he had reserved a deluxe room for her at the Echo Hotel under his account. He described in loving detail the romantic dinners they would share at Lagos's best restaurants. He talked about taking her to Lekki Conservation Center to see the nature and wildlife. He promised that meeting in person would only deepen what they had already built online. Rebecca counted down the days, barely able to contain her excitement. This was it. This was the moment her life would change for the better. After 2 years of loneliness and disappointment, she was going to meet her soulmate. What Rebecca didn't know was that Emmanuel Okafor had already moved to the next phase of his operation. In early March, he had contacted the other members of his criminal network, informing them that another American woman was ready to be collected. He provided them with Rebecca's flight information, physical description, and photograph. He told them she believed she was coming to meet her British boyfriend and would be looking for someone named David Thompson at the airport. The gang members had done this before, multiple times, and they knew exactly how to handle naive foreign women arriving at Murtala Muhammad International Airport expecting romance and finding something very different. On the evening of March 14th, Rebecca had a final dinner with her family at her parents' house on Maple Grove Drive. Patricia had cooked Rebecca's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, as if it might be the last home-cooked food Rebecca would have for a while. The atmosphere was tense despite everyone's attempts at normalcy. Michael kept asking Rebecca to reconsider, to at least postpone the trip and meet David in a different location first. Daniel tried one more time to present evidence of romance scams, showing Rebecca news articles about women who had been trafficked or robbed or worse after traveling to meet men they had met online. Rebecca listened politely but remained firm in her decision. "I know you're all worried," she said as dinner ended, "but I need you to trust me. I'm an adult. I'm not stupid. I've taken every precaution. I'll check in with you constantly, and I really believe David is who he says he is. I can feel it." Her certainty was absolute, built on 4 months of daily communication, countless hours of conversation, and the deep emotional investment she had made in this relationship. She hugged her parents and brother goodbye, promised to call as soon as she landed in Lagos, and drove back to her apartment to finish packing. That night, Rebecca could barely sleep from excitement and nervousness. She reviewed her packing list one more time, checking that she had her passport, visa documents, hotel confirmation, enough cash in both dollars and naira, modest clothing, toiletries and medications. She had purchased a new journal specifically for this trip, planning to document every moment of finally meeting the man she loved. She set 3 alarms to ensure she wouldn't oversleep and miss her early morning flight. In the darkness of her bedroom, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to see David in person, to hear his British accent face to face rather than through a phone, to feel his arms around her. Tomorrow would be the beginning of her new life. She was certain of it. While Rebecca dreamed of romance in her Westfield apartment, Emmanuel Okafor sat in the internet cafe in Lagos, coordinating final details with his accomplices. The American teacher would arrive the following evening. Everything was ready. The gang had her photograph, her flight information, her expectations. They knew she was looking for a British engineer named David Thompson who would be waiting for her at arrivals. They knew she was emotionally vulnerable, financially modest, but not poor, and that she trusted easily. She was, in the language of the criminal network, a perfect mark. Emmanuel sent a final WhatsApp message to Rebecca, time to arrive just as she was waking up on the morning of her flight. "Good morning, my love. I can hardly believe that in just hours we will finally be together. I have dreamed of this moment since our first conversation. Travel safely. I will be waiting for you with open arms. All my love, David." Rebecca read the message as she got ready for her flight and felt tears of happiness in her eyes. This was really happening. Her life was about to change. She had no way of knowing that the man who sent that message had never loved her, had never intended to meet her, and had instead arranged for her to be kidnapped the moment she stepped off the plane. The trap was set. The victim was on her way, and the nightmare was about to begin. March 15, 2019 began like any other day for most people in Westfield, Indiana. But for Rebecca Thompson, it was the day that would divide her life into before and after. She woke at 4:30 a.m. to catch her 8:15 flight from Chicago O'Hare to Lagos. Her parents had offered to drive her to the airport, but she had declined, not wanting an emotional goodbye at the terminal. Instead, she had arranged for a car service to pick her up at 5:30 a.m. The driver arrived on time, helped her load her single suitcase and carry-on bag, and they began the hour-long drive south toward Chicago in the pre-dawn darkness. During the drive, Rebecca sent messages to Amanda, her parents, and Daniel, letting them know she was on her way to the airport. She received responses almost immediately from all of them. Her mother's message said, "We love you. Please be safe. Stay in touch." Amanda wrote, "Can't believe you're really doing this. Call me the second you land." Daniel's message was more pragmatic. "Remember everything we talked about. Trust your gut. Don't be afraid to bail if something seems wrong." Rebecca smiled at her phone, touched by their concern even though she thought it was unnecessary. She responded to each of them with variations of, "I love you, don't worry, I'll be fine, talk to you soon." She arrived at O'Hare at 6:45 a.m. and made her way through check-in and security without incident. United Airlines Flight 997 to Lagos was scheduled to depart from Terminal 1, Gate C22. Rebecca found a coffee shop near her gate and ordered a latte and a muffin, too nervous to eat much despite knowing it would be a long flight. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to David. "At the airport. So excited I can barely breathe. See you in about 20 hours. His response came quickly. "The countdown is finally over. I've been walking around my flat all morning, unable to focus on anything. Soon you'll be here and everything will be perfect." Rebecca read the message 3 times, memorizing every word. The flight boarded on time. Rebecca had splurged on premium economy, knowing the 15-hour journey would be grueling in a standard seat. She settled into her seat, 24A, a window position that would allow her to see Africa as they approached Lagos. She watched through the window as the plane pushed back from the gate, taxied to the runway, and lifted into the gray Chicago morning sky. As the plane climbed and turned eastward over Lake Michigan, Rebecca felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was really doing this. She was flying halfway around the world to meet a man she had never physically touched, based on nothing but months of messages and phone calls and the conviction that what they shared was real. The flight was long and uncomfortable despite the better seat. Rebecca tried to sleep, but managed only a few hours of fitful rest. She watched 2 movies without paying much attention to either. She read the same 3 pages of her book repeatedly without absorbing the words. Mostly, she stared out the window when there was anything to see, and later at the seat back in front of her, thinking about David, replaying their conversations in her mind, imagining their reunion at the airport. She had pictured it 1,000 times. The moment she would walk through the arrivals area and see him standing there, holding a sign with her name perhaps, or more romantically, just recognizing each other immediately, despite never having met. The way they would embrace, the sound of his voice saying her name in person for the first time, the feeling of his hand holding hers. The plane stopped in Brussels for a 2-hour layover, then continued on to Lagos. As they approached the West African coast, Rebecca pressed her face against the window, trying to see the city David had described to her so many times. Lagos appeared first as a brown haze along the coast, then resolved into sprawling neighborhoods that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. She could see the gleaming towers of Victoria Island and Ikoyi, the business districts David had mentioned, surrounded by vast expanses of densely packed housing. The plane descended over the Atlantic, turned, and touched down at Murtala Muhammad International Airport at 6:45 p.m. local time, only 15 minutes behind schedule. As the plane taxied to the gate, Rebecca's heart pounded. She checked her appearance in her phone camera, refreshed her lipstick, made sure her hair looked presentable despite 15 hours of travel. She turned off airplane mode and immediately sent a message to David. "We've landed. I'll text you when I clear customs. I can't wait to see you." She then sent a group message to her family and Amanda, landed safely in Lagos, about to go through immigration and customs. "We'll update soon. Love you all." Immigration was chaotic and slow. Rebecca waited in a long line of international passengers, clutching her passport and visa documents. watching as officials processed each traveler with methodical thoroughness. When it was finally her turn, the immigration officer, a stern-looking man in his 50s, examined her passport and visa, then asked her several questions. Purpose of visit? Tourism, Rebecca answered. How long staying in Nigeria? 9 days. Where staying? Echo Hotel on Victoria Island. Who you visiting? A friend who works here. The officer stamped her passport and waved her through without further comment. Baggage claim was equally chaotic, packed with travelers jostling around multiple carousels. Rebecca found her suitcase after a 20-minute wait, then proceeded to customs where another officer asked to see inside her bag. He unzipped it, glanced at the contents without really examining anything, and gestured for her to close it and move on. The entire process from landing to clearing customs had taken nearly 90 minutes. By the time Rebecca walked through the final set of doors into the arrivals area at 8:20 p.m., she was exhausted from travel and overwhelmed by the crowd, noise, and energy of the airport. The arrivals hall was packed with people. Drivers held signs with passenger names. Families called out to arriving relatives. Taxi toots approached every emerging passenger, shouting offers in accented English. Rebecca looked around anxiously for David, scanning the crowd for the face she had memorized from photographs. She didn't see him. She walked slowly through the arrivals area, checking her phone for messages. Nothing from David since before she landed. She tried calling him. The call went straight to voicemail. She sent a WhatsApp message. I'm here. In arrivals area. Where are you? The message showed only one check mark, meaning it hadn't been delivered. 10 minutes passed. Rebecca's excitement began to shift toward worry. Where was he? He knew her flight details. He had been so enthusiastic about her arrival. Why wasn't he here? She tried calling again. Voicemail. She looked around more desperately now, wondering if she had somehow missed him in the crowd. Taxi drivers continued to approach her. Taxi, taxi, where you going, madam? Lagos, very big, I take you anywhere. She ignored them, focused on finding David. After 15 minutes of searching and waiting, Rebecca's worry had escalated to genuine anxiety. Something was wrong. David wouldn't just not show up. Not after everything they had shared, everything they had planned. She was about to find a place to sit down and figure out what to do when a young man, probably late 20s, approached her with a friendly smile. Excuse me, he said in accented English that wasn't British. Are you Rebecca? From America? Rebecca felt a flood of relief. Yes I am. Are you David's friend? The man nodded enthusiastically. Yes. My name is Victor. I am David's colleague from the construction project. He sent me to collect you. He is very sorry, but there was an emergency at the work site. A problem with one of the machines. Very serious problem. He cannot leave until it is fixed, but he didn't want you to wait here alone. So he sent me to take you to the hotel. Rebecca hesitated. David hadn't mentioned sending someone else to pick her up. Why hadn't he called or messaged to tell her about the emergency? Victor seemed to sense her doubt. He pulled out his phone and showed her a WhatsApp conversation with a contact saved as David. The messages confirmed what Victor had just told her, an equipment failure at the project site, asking Victor to collect Rebecca, apologizing for not being able to meet her flight himself. Rebecca glanced at the messages, which looked genuine enough, and felt her anxiety ease slightly. I tried calling David, she said. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Victor nodded sympathetically. Yes, the work site is in area with poor network. Sometimes no signal at all. He will call you later when he finishes with the emergency. But don't worry, I will take you safely to your hotel, and David will meet you there later this evening. Rebecca wanted to believe him. Victor seemed nice, his story made sense, and the alternative that something was seriously wrong was too frightening to contemplate. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you for coming to get me." Victor's smile widened. Of course. David is my good friend. Any friend of David is my friend also. Come, let me help with your bag." As Victor took Rebecca's suitcase and began leading her toward the exit, a woman approached them. She was young, probably mid-20s, wearing Western-style jeans and a colorful blouse, with her hair in elaborate braids. She smiled warmly at Rebecca. "Hello, you must be Rebecca. I am Kioma, Victor's girlfriend. I came with him to help collect you. David told us all about you. We are so happy to finally meet you." Rebecca felt more reassured by Kioma's presence. If Victor had brought his girlfriend, this must be legitimate. They seemed like a nice young couple helping out David's American visitor. She smiled back at Kioma. "It's nice to meet you too. Thank you both for picking me up." The three of them walked together out of the terminal into the humid Lagos night. The parking area was crowded with vehicles, people loading luggage, horns honking, drivers shouting to each other. Victor led them to a black Toyota Camry, parked in a spot that required some maneuvering to exit. Behind the wheel sat another man, older than Victor, maybe in his early 30s. "This is Tunde," Victor said. "He is our driver tonight." Tunde nodded at Rebecca, but didn't speak. Victor loaded her suitcase into the trunk while Kioma opened the rear passenger door and gestured for Rebecca to get in. Rebecca climbed into the back seat, her exhaustion from the flight catching up with her now that she was finally in a car headed toward the hotel. Kioma slid in next to her. Victor took the front passenger seat. Tunde started the engine and began navigating out of the parking area and onto the main road leading away from the airport. The ride was initially what Rebecca expected. Tunde drove them through areas that looked industrial and commercial, warehouses and small businesses lining roads with terrible potholes and aggressive traffic. Victor and Kioma made small talk, asking Rebecca about her flight, telling her about Lagos, pointing out landmarks as they passed them. "Where does David live?" Rebecca asked. "I know he mentioned Victoria Island, but I never got his exact address." Victor glanced back at her. "David lives in Victoria Island Extension. Very nice area. His flat is at 15 Victoria Island Extension, very close to the hotel where you are staying." Rebecca made a mental note of the address, planning to ask David about it later. The conversation continued pleasantly enough. Kioma asked about America, about Indiana, about teaching. Rebecca answered, warming to these friendly young people who were being so kind to her. But as they drove further from the airport, she began to notice that the neighborhood quality was declining rather than improving. The buildings were getting more ramshackle, the streets darker and less maintained. She had expected them to be heading toward the modern, wealthy areas she had seen in David's photographs, but this looked like the opposite. "Are we going the right way?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "This doesn't look like the route to Victoria Island." Victor turned in his seat to face her. "Ah, yes. Traffic is very bad on the main road tonight, so Tunde is taking a back route. It is faster this way. Don't worry, we will reach the hotel soon." The explanation was plausible, but Rebecca's instincts were beginning to signal that something was off. The traffic actually seemed lighter on these back streets. There was no reason to avoid the main roads. She checked her phone. Still no message from David. She tried calling him again. Still straight to voicemail. She opened Google Maps to check their route but discovered she had no data connection. Her American SIM card wasn't working in Nigeria, and she hadn't had a chance to buy a local one at the airport. "How much longer to the hotel?" she asked, her anxiety rising. "Not long now," Victor said. "Maybe 20 more minutes." But 20 minutes passed. Then 30, and they were still driving through increasingly rough neighborhoods. The buildings were concrete structures in various states of disrepair. The streets were barely lit. There were few other vehicles. Rebecca's anxiety had progressed to real fear. This was not right. Something was very wrong. "Where are we?" she demanded, her voice sharp now. "This is not the way to Victoria Island. I want you to take me to the hotel immediately." Tunde, who had been silent the entire drive, spoke for the first time. "We are almost there, madam. Please relax." But Rebecca was not going to relax. Every instinct was screaming at her that she was in danger. She looked at Kioma, who had been so friendly at the airport, and now saw something different in the young woman's expression. Not warmth, but cold calculation. "I want to get out of this car," Rebecca said firmly. "Stop the car right now and let me out." Victor and Kioma exchanged glances. Victor's friendly demeanor disappeared. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "You are David's guest. We have instructions to deliver you to a specific location. You will go where we take you." The temperature in the car seemed to drop. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where is David?" "There is no David," Victor said matter-of-factly. "There never was." The words took a moment to process. No David. But that was impossible. She had been talking to David for months. She knew him. She loved him. This didn't make sense. "What do you mean there's no David?" "It means you've been talking to someone who doesn't exist," Kioma said, her voice devoid of the friendliness she had shown earlier. "You came to Lagos because of a story. That story was designed to bring you here." Rebecca felt like she might vomit. "Oh my God. Oh my God. What's happening? Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere we can discuss what happens next," Victor said. "I suggest you stay calm and don't cause problems. Things will go easier for you if you cooperate." The car turned onto an even darker street, and then into what appeared to be an abandoned industrial area. Large warehouse buildings loomed in the darkness. Tunde pulled the car to a stop in front of one of the warehouses. The address, if there had ever been one visible, was long gone, but this was 79 Boundary Road in the Ajagunle district of Lagos, though Rebecca had no way of knowing that. "Get out," Victor said, opening his door. Rebecca didn't move. Terror had frozen her in place. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. She would wake up. This wasn't real. Kioma grabbed her arm roughly. "Get out now, or we will drag you out." Moving mechanically, Rebecca opened the car door and stepped out into the humid night. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Victor pulled her suitcase from the trunk and gripped her arm. Tunde and Kioma flanked her on either side. Together they walked her toward a door in the side of the warehouse. Victor knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 times more. The door opened from inside. A large man stood in the doorway, backlit so Rebecca couldn't see his face clearly. He was powerfully built, probably 6 feet tall, wearing jeans and a dirty tank top. "This is the American?" he asked in heavily accented English. "Yes," Victor replied. "Just arrived from the airport as planned." The man stepped aside to let them enter. Inside, the warehouse was largely empty, just concrete floors and metal support beams. A few pieces of old furniture were scattered around. A desk, some chairs, a stained couch. Bare bulbs hung from wires, providing minimal light. In the back corner, Rebecca could see what looked like a small room built within the larger warehouse structure. "Bring her to the back," the large man said. Victor and Kioma walked Rebecca across the warehouse toward the small room. She was shaking uncontrollably now, her mind racing with panic and disbelief. The man followed behind them. When they reached the room, Victor opened the door. Inside was a narrow space, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with a single bed, a plastic chair, and a bucket. There was one small window high up on the wall, covered with metal bars. "This is where you will stay," the large man said. "My name is Ibrahim. You will do exactly what I say when I say it. If you cooperate, you will not be harmed. If you resist or try to escape, things will become very unpleasant for you. Do you understand?" Rebecca couldn't speak. She just stared at him in horror. Ibrahim grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to look at him. "I asked if you understand." "Yes," Rebecca whispered. "I understand." "Good." Ibrahim released her and stepped back. "Your family will be contacted soon about your situation. What happens next depends on how cooperative they are. In the meantime, make yourself comfortable. You may be here for a while." With that, Ibrahim, Victor, and Chioma walked out of the room. The door closed behind them. Rebecca heard a lock click into place. She was alone. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had been kidnapped. The man she thought she loved didn't exist. She was a prisoner in a warehouse in Lagos, Nigeria, thousands of miles from home, and no one knew where she was. Rebecca sank onto the bed and began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She had been so stupid, so naive. Everyone had warned her. Her parents, her brother, her friends. They had all told her this was dangerous, that she didn't really know this man, that she needed to be careful. But she had been so certain, so convinced that David was real, that their connection was genuine, that love could overcome skepticism and caution. And now she was here, trapped in hell, and it was her own fault for being too trusting, too desperate, too foolish. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Rebecca heard footsteps approaching the door. The lock clicked. The door opened. Ibrahim stood there holding her suitcase. He tossed it into the room. "Your things," he said. Then he pulled something from his pocket. Her phone. "I will need this," he said, "but first you will record a message for your family." He opened the phone. Rebecca hadn't put a passcode on it, assuming she would be with David and not wanting any barriers to communication. Ibrahim opened the camera app and switched it to video mode. He handed the phone to Victor, who had appeared behind him. Then Ibrahim addressed Rebecca. "You will say exactly what I tell you to say. Do not add anything. Do not try to signal for help. Just speak the words I give you. If you do this correctly, we will contact your family and begin negotiations. If you refuse or try to be clever, things will become very painful for you. Do you understand?" Rebecca nodded, her tears still flowing. "Good." Ibrahim pulled out a piece of paper and read from it. "You will say, 'Mom, Dad, I am alive, but I have been kidnapped in Lagos. I am being held by people who want money for my release. They are demanding $150,000 in Bitcoin within 7 days. If you do not pay, they will hurt me. Please do whatever they ask. I love you, and I'm sorry." Rebecca's voice shook as she repeated the words into the camera that Victor held pointed at her face. When she finished, Ibrahim nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Now we send this to your family and we wait." He took the phone from Victor and left the room, locking the door behind him once again. Rebecca was alone with her suitcase and her terror. The first hours of her captivity stretched ahead of her, and she had no idea if she would survive them. The criminal organization that had kidnapped Rebecca Thompson was more sophisticated and extensive than she could have imagined in her worst nightmares. Was Ibrahim Yusuf, the imposing man who had claimed control over her fate, was a 35-year-old Nigerian national with a long history of violent crime and fraud. Born in Kano in northern Nigeria, Ibrahim had moved to Lagos in his early 20s, seeking opportunities that the poor northern regions couldn't provide. What he found instead was a city where organized crime flourished, where poverty and corruption created perfect conditions for those willing to operate outside the law. Ibrahim's criminal career began with petty theft and street-level fraud, but he had ambition and intelligence that quickly elevated him to more lucrative operations. By his late 20s, he had become involved in internet fraud schemes, the kind that Nigerians themselves called Yahoo Yahoo, in reference to the email platform where many scams originated. He worked with teams of scammers who targeted foreigners with advance fee fraud, romance scams, and business email compromise schemes. The work was relatively low risk compared to violent crime, and the profits could be substantial if you had the right skills and connections. But Ibrahim wanted more. He saw that while digital scams could extract thousands of dollars from victims, the real money came from kidnapping. Wealthy Nigerians were frequently kidnapped for ransom, with demands sometimes reaching hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Ibrahim realized that foreign nationals could be even more valuable targets. Their families back in America or Europe would be desperate to secure their safe return and often had access to funds that Nigerian families couldn't match. Moreover, kidnapping foreigners created international pressure that could motivate quicker payments. Around 2016, Ibrahim began building a network specifically designed to kidnap foreign nationals, particularly Americans and Europeans, who could be lured to Nigeria through romance scams. He recruited team members with specific skills. Emmanuel Okafor, the 31-year-old man who had posed as David Thompson to Rebecca, was Ibrahim's digital specialist. Emmanuel ran the online operations from an internet cafe at 23 Awolowo Road in Ikeja. The cafe was a legitimate business during the day, serving regular customers who needed internet access. But Emmanuel had an arrangement with the owner that allowed him to use a back room for his scamming operations. Emmanuel was brilliant at creating false identities and building emotional connections with vulnerable women online. He had studied psychology informally through reading and observation, learning what made people trust, what made them lower their defenses, what made them willing to take risks they would normally avoid. He could maintain multiple personas simultaneously, keeping the details of each fictional identity straight through careful record-keeping and natural talent for deception. Emmanuel didn't think of himself as a cruel person. He rationalized his work as simply taking advantage of stupid people who deserved what they got for being so naive. He felt no empathy for his victims. Victor Adeyemi, 28 years old, served as the network's recruiter and frontline operative. His role was to collect victims at the airport, playing the part of a friend or colleague of whatever fictional persona had been used to lure them to Lagos. Victor was good-looking and charming when needed, with a friendly demeanor that put people at ease. He could speak English well enough to be convincing, and he had practiced the art of deception enough that he rarely made mistakes that aroused suspicion too early. Victor had joined Ibrahim's organization 2 years earlier, recruited from a smaller fraud operation. The money was better, and Victor had few moral qualms about kidnapping foreigners who were foolish enough to fly to Nigeria to meet people they had never actually met. Chioma Nwosu, 26, was the network's female accomplice. Her presence served a specific purpose. When solo male kidnappers collected female victims at airports, it sometimes raised red flags. But a young couple seemed less threatening. Chioma's job was to put victims at ease during the drive from the airport to the warehouse, to make conversation, to project normalcy and friendliness. She had been involved in the organization for about 18 months, recruited by Ibrahim when he realized the value of having a woman on the team. Chioma came from deep poverty in the Niger Delta region and saw this work as a way to earn money she could never make in legitimate employment. Like Emmanuel, she felt no sympathy for the victims. These were wealthy foreigners who had everything while she had grown up with nothing. Taking from them felt like redistribution rather than crime. Tunde Bakare, 33, was the logistics coordinator and primary driver. He had been with Ibrahim the longest, nearly 4 years, and handled the practical details of moving victims, securing safe houses, and disposing of evidence when necessary. Tunde was quieter than the others, more serious, and according to Ibrahim, more reliable. He followed orders without question and had never shown any signs of wavering in his commitment to the operation. Tunde had a wife and 3 children, living in a small apartment in Mushin district. His legitimate cover was working as a taxi driver, which explained his irregular hours and frequent absences. The network operated from multiple locations across Lagos. The warehouse at 79 Boundary Road in Ajagunle was their primary holding facility for kidnap victims. The area was industrial and neglected, with minimal police presence and neighbors who had learned not to ask questions about suspicious activity. Ibrahim had arranged the use of the warehouse through connections with the property owner, who asked no questions as long as the monthly payment arrived on time. The small room where Rebecca was being held had been constructed specifically for holding captives. It was basically a concrete box with minimal ventilation, one barred window too high and small to escape through, and a reinforced door that locked from the outside. The organization had a secondary location as well, an apartment in Festac Town at 142 4th Avenue. This served as a backup safe house if victims needed to be moved quickly, or if the warehouse became compromised for any reason. The apartment was in a large residential complex, where people came and went constantly, making it easier to move prisoners without arousing too much attention. Ibrahim rented it under a false name through a landlord who accepted cash and didn't ask for proper documentation. The financial operation behind the kidnappings was almost as sophisticated as the abductions themselves. Ransom demands were always made in cryptocurrency, usually Bitcoin, because it was difficult to trace and could be quickly converted to cash through various exchanges and money laundering operations. Ibrahim had connections with several money launderers who would convert Bitcoin to Naira or dollars for a 20% commission. The gang typically demanded between $50,000 and $200,000, depending on their assessment of the victim's family wealth. The amounts were high enough to be very profitable, but usually not so high that they were completely impossible for middle-class American or European families to raise. The network had been operating for approximately 3 years before Rebecca's kidnapping. During that time, they had successfully kidnapped and ransomed at least 6 other foreign nationals. 4 had been American women lured through romance scams similar to Rebecca's. 1 had been a British man who thought he was coming to Lagos for a job interview. Another was a Dutch woman who believed she was meeting a Nigerian prince she had been corresponding with online. In each case, the pattern was the same: elaborate online deception lasting months, a carefully planned airport pickup, immediate abduction, ransom demands, and eventually payment from desperate families. The amounts collected varied. The smallest ransom had been $28,000 for a woman whose family genuinely couldn't afford more and managed to negotiate down from the initial demand. The largest had been $175,000 for a man whose family owned a successful business and paid quickly out of fear for his safety. In total, the network had collected over $600,000 across their previous 6 kidnappings. After splitting the money among team members and paying commissions to money launderers, each core member of the organization had made enough to live quite comfortably by Nigerian standards. Their confidence in continuing the operation came from multiple factors. First, the success rate was perfect. They had never failed to collect a ransom. Families always paid eventually, even if it required negotiation and time. Second, law enforcement had never seriously threatened them. A few perfunctory investigations had been opened after families reported kidnappings to foreign embassies, but coordination between Nigerian police and international authorities was poor. Even when investigations happened, corruption and lack of resources meant they rarely went anywhere. Third, the gang had developed systems that minimized risk. They used burner phones for all communications, changed locations regularly, and maintained strict operational security. Ibrahim ran the organization with military-like discipline. There were clear rules: no unnecessary violence against victims unless absolutely required to enforce compliance. No sexual assault, which Ibrahim viewed as unprofessional and likely to escalate law enforcement response. No alcohol or drugs while on operations. No discussing operational details with outsiders, even family members. Violations of these rules resulted in being cut from the organization, or in serious cases, worse consequences that served as examples to the others. The gang also had a network of corrupt officials who provided assistance for a fee. A low-level immigration officer at the airport could be paid to not notice certain passengers being collected by non-family members. Police in certain districts could be convinced to ignore suspicious activity in warehouses or apartments. Court clerks could misplace files if investigations ever got that far. This web of corruption was a normal part of doing business in Lagos's criminal underworld, and Ibrahim maintained these relationships carefully. When Rebecca Thompson's flight landed on March 15, 2019, the organization executed a plan they had carried out successfully multiple times before. Emmanuel had provided all her details to the team: her flight number, arrival time, physical description, photograph, and what she was expecting. Victor and Kioma collected her from the airport using the David emergency story, a narrative they had used before with slight variations. The drive to the warehouse followed the usual route, gradually moving from commercial areas near the airport to industrial zones, and finally to the Ajagunle neighborhood where questions were rarely asked. Ibrahim had been waiting at the warehouse with everything prepared. The room was clean enough, with minimal furnishings but nothing that could be used as a weapon or escape tool. There was water and basic food ready to provide the prisoner, enough to keep her alive and functional but nothing comfortable. The procedures for contact with the family had been developed and refined through previous operations. Record a video within the first few hours. Make the ransom demand clear and specific. Set a firm but achievable deadline. Establish a communication channel through the victim's phone. By the time Rebecca was locked in her cell at approximately 10 p.m. on March 15th, everyone in the organization knew their roles for the days ahead. Emmanuel would handle the ransom negotiations through Rebecca's phone and email. Victor and Kioma would maintain security at the warehouse, rotating shifts with other gang members who served as guards. Tunde would handle logistics and supply runs. Ibrahim would oversee everything and make final decisions about how to respond to the family's cooperation or resistance. The network was a well-oiled machine designed for one purpose: extracting maximum money from foreign families through the kidnapping of their loved ones. Rebecca Thompson was simply their latest target, another profitable opportunity in a business that had made them wealthy by Nigerian standards. They had no personal animosity toward her. She was just inventory, a commodity to be held until payment was received, and then released to avoid the complications that came with murder. The whole system was designed to be efficient, relatively low risk, and highly profitable. It had worked perfectly 6 times before. They had no reason to think this time would be any different. The first night of Rebecca Thompson's captivity was the longest night of her life. After Ibrahim and the others left her locked in the small concrete room, she sat on the edge of the thin mattress, trying to process what had happened to her. The terror was overwhelming, making it hard to breathe, hard to think clearly. Every sound made her jump, her heart pounding with fear that someone was coming back to hurt her. The warehouse was not entirely quiet. She could hear voices occasionally, muffled conversations in what she assumed was the main area. There were other sounds she couldn't identify: mechanical noises, vehicles passing on the street outside, the scurrying of rats or other creatures in the walls. The room was oppressively hot despite the late hour. The single window near the ceiling provided minimal ventilation. There was no air conditioning, no fan. The humidity pressed down on her like a weight. Rebecca was still wearing the modest long-sleeved dress she had put on that morning in Indiana, clothing that had seemed appropriate for meeting David, but was now soaked with sweat and tears. She wanted to change into something lighter from her suitcase, but was afraid to undress even partially, afraid that someone might come in at any moment. The reality of her situation kept crashing over her in waves. She had been kidnapped. People were holding her prisoner. They wanted money from her family. She might die here in this horrible place. The thought of her parents receiving the video she had been forced to record made her stomach turn. They would be devastated. They would blame themselves for not stopping her from coming to Nigeria. Her father had tried so hard to convince her not to make this trip, and she had dismissed his concerns as overprotective paranoia. Now he would have to watch his daughter begging for her life on a video sent by criminals. And David, or rather, not David. The man she had spent 4 months falling in love with didn't exist. Every conversation, every expression of affection, every shared dream about their future together had been a lie manufactured by someone who saw her only as a source of money. The emotional devastation of this realization was almost as terrible as the physical danger she was in. She had given her heart completely to someone who had never existed. She had trusted so absolutely, had been willing to fly across the world for love, and it had all been fiction designed to trap her. Rebecca thought about all the warning signs she had ignored. The fact that David's video calls were always brief and often poor quality. The way his work schedule always prevented him from calling at consistent times. His reluctance to provide specific details about where he lived. The request for money that she had complied with so easily. His insistence that she visit Nigeria rather than him visiting America. Her family and friends had all seen these red flags. Why hadn't she? Because she wanted to believe. Because she was lonely and he made her feel special. Because the alternative to believing was accepting that she was alone and might stay that way. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame terror enough for Rebecca to lie down on the mattress. It smelled of mold and old sweat. The thin sheet that covered it was stained and rough, but she was so tired from the long flight and the trauma of the evening that her body shut down despite her mind's panic. She fell into a fitful sleep filled with nightmares. She dreamed she was running through dark streets trying to find the airport. She dreamed she was calling for help, but no sound came from her mouth. She dreamed of her mother crying. She woke with a start at dawn when harsh sunlight suddenly streamed through the high window. She had slept maybe 3 hours. Her body ached from the hard mattress and the stress of the previous day. She was desperately thirsty. Looking around the room in daylight, she saw details she had missed in the darkness. The concrete walls were water-stained and cracked. The bucket in the corner reeked. There was a single plastic water bottle on the floor near the door that she hadn't noticed the night before. She picked it up and examined it suspiciously, wondering if it could be drugged or poisoned. But her thirst won over her caution. She drank half the bottle in desperate gulps. Around 8 a.m., she heard the lock on the door click. She stood up quickly, her heart racing. The door opened and Kioma entered carrying a plastic plate with some bread and what looked like fried plantains. She set the plate on the plastic chair without speaking. Her friendly demeanor from the airport was completely gone. She looked at Rebecca with cold indifference, as if she were examining an object rather than a person. "Please," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. "I need to use a bathroom. A real bathroom." Kioma pointed to the bucket in the corner. "That is your bathroom." Rebecca felt humiliation burn through her fear. "I can't. That's not. Please. That is what you have," Kioma said flatly. "Use it or don't. Your choice." She turned to leave. "Wait," Rebecca called out. "What's going to happen to me? When will you let me go?" Kioma paused at the door. When your family pays, you go home. If they don't pay, you don't go home. Simple. How long will that take? Kioma shrugged. Depends on your family. Some families pay in days. Some take weeks. Some never pay. What happens if they never pay? Rebecca asked. Though she wasn't sure, she wanted to know the answer. Kioma's expression didn't change. You don't want to find out. Eat your food. Save your strength. With that, she left, locking the door behind her again. Rebecca looked at the food with no appetite. The bread was hard, the plantains lukewarm and greasy, but she knew Kioma was right about saving her strength. She forced herself to eat the bread and some of the plantains, washing it down with the rest of the water bottle. Then she sat on the bed and tried to figure out what to do. The first thing was to understand her situation clearly. She was being held for ransom. The demand was $150,000. That was an enormous amount of money for her family. Her father had retired from his accounting job 2 years ago. Her mother still worked as a nurse but was planning to retire within the year. They lived comfortably but were not wealthy. They had some savings and retirement accounts, but liquidating them quickly would be difficult. Daniel worked in IT and probably had some savings, but not anywhere near enough to make up the full amount. Her friends might be able to help with small amounts, but most of them were in similar financial situations to her, middle-class people with modest incomes. Could her family raise $150,000? Maybe, if they liquidated everything, if they borrowed from retirement accounts, if they got loans. But it would take time. The kidnappers had given them 7 days. Was that even possible? Rebecca had no idea. And what if they couldn't raise the money? What then? Kioma's ominous warning echoed in her mind. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rebecca had no watch, no phone, no way to track time except by the movement of sunlight through the high window. She tried to keep her mind occupied by thinking about her students, about lesson plans she had been developing, about anything other than where she was. But panic kept crashing through her attempts at distraction. She was a prisoner. She might die here. She might never see her family again. Around midday, the door opened again. This time it was Ibrahim who entered. He looked at her with an expression that mixed assessment and mild satisfaction. "You slept?" he asked. "A little," Rebecca answered quietly. "Good. You need to stay healthy." He produced her phone from his pocket. "Your family has been contacted. They have received your video and the payment instructions. Now we wait for their response." Rebecca's heart clenched. "What did they say?" "They are processing the information," Ibrahim said. "These things take time. People need to understand their situation before they act." He sat down on the plastic chair, his large frame making the cheap furniture creak. "Let me explain something to you, Rebecca. This will go much easier if you understand how this works." Rebecca nodded, afraid to speak. "You are a business transaction," Ibrahim continued. "Nothing personal. You came to Nigeria because you are stupid and believed a story about love. That stupidity created an opportunity for us. We took that opportunity. Now your family must pay to get you back. This is simple economics. They pay, you go home. They don't pay, you stay here. Eventually everyone pays. Maybe not the full amount. Maybe we negotiate. But everyone pays something." "What if they can't afford it?" Rebecca asked. "Then they borrow from family, from friends, from banks. They sell things. They do whatever is necessary. This is their daughter. They will find a way." Ibrahim leaned forward slightly. "Your job is to be patient and cooperative. Do not try to escape. Do not try to fight. Do not try to be clever. If you do these things, you will be hurt. If you cooperate, you will be treated reasonably well for a prisoner. You will be fed. You will be safe from serious harm, and when your family pays, you will be released exactly as promised." "How do I know you'll actually release me?" Rebecca asked. "Because we are professionals," Ibrahim said without any irony. "Dead Americans cause problems. Released Americans go away and we never hear from them again. We have done this before many times. Every person we have held has been released after payment. We are not interested in killing you. We are interested in your family's money." There was something almost reassuring about his cold business logic, though Rebecca knew she couldn't really trust anything he said. At least he was claiming they intended to release her. That gave her something to hope for. "I need you to make another video," Ibrahim said, this time telling your family to hurry, that you are suffering, that you need them to do everything possible to pay quickly. Rebecca's stomach turned. She didn't want to make another video, didn't want to cause her family more pain, but she also knew she had no choice. "Okay," she said quietly. Ibrahim pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. He handed it to Kioma, who had appeared in the doorway. "Speak naturally," he instructed Rebecca. "Tell them you are scared. Tell them to please pay quickly so you can come home. But do not say anything about where you are or who we are. Just emotion. Just begging." Rebecca looked at the camera lens and felt tears start to flow without effort. "Mom, Dad, Daniel," she began, her voice breaking. "I'm so scared. I don't know if I'm going to be okay. Please do whatever they ask. I just want to come home. I'm sorry for not listening to you. I'm sorry for being so stupid. Please, please help me." She dissolved into sobs. "Good," Ibrahim said, apparently satisfied. "Very convincing." He took the phone back from Kioma. "This will help motivate them." After they left, Rebecca collapsed on the bed, crying uncontrollably. The next days stretched ahead of her with no clear end point. All she could do was wait and hope that her family could somehow raise the money to buy her freedom. The question that haunted her was whether 7 days would be enough time, and what would happen if it wasn't. While Rebecca Thompson suffered through her first full day of captivity in the warehouse at Ajagunle, her family in Westfield, Indiana was experiencing a nightmare of their own. The previous evening, after Rebecca's plane had been scheduled to land, Michael and Patricia Thompson had been checking their phones constantly for an update from their daughter. When an hour passed after the expected landing time with no message, Patricia had called Rebecca's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again 30 minutes later. Still voicemail. By 11 p.m. Indiana time, both parents were seriously worried. "Maybe the customs process is just taking a long time," Michael suggested, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Or maybe she's having trouble with her phone working internationally. She would find a way to contact us," Patricia insisted. She promised to check in immediately. Something's wrong. Daniel had driven to his parents' house that evening to wait with them for news from Rebecca. When midnight approached with no word, he had started making calls. First to United Airlines, asking if there had been any problems with the flight. The airline confirmed that Flight 997 had landed in Lagos only 15 minutes late, and all passengers had deplaned normally. Daniel then called the US Embassy in Lagos, getting routed through an emergency line. He explained that his sister was supposed to have landed several hours ago and had promised to check in, but hadn't. The embassy employee was sympathetic but explained there wasn't much they could do immediately. "If she doesn't contact you within 24 hours, call back and we can start looking into it more seriously." At 1:30 a.m. Indiana time, which was 7:30 a.m. in Lagos, Patricia's phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message. She grabbed it desperately, hoping it was Rebecca. Instead, what she saw made her scream. It was a video file sent from Rebecca's number with no accompanying text. With shaking hands, Patricia opened the video. The image showed Rebecca sitting on a bed in a bare concrete room. Her face was tear-streaked and terrified. She looked directly into the camera and spoke in a trembling voice. "Mom, Dad, I am alive, but I have been kidnapped in Lagos. I am being held by people who want money for my release. They are demanding $150,000 in Bitcoin within 7 days. If you do not pay, they will hurt me. Please do whatever they ask. I love you and I'm sorry." The video ended. Patricia screamed again and dropped the phone. Michael grabbed it and watched the video, his face draining of all color. Daniel took the phone from his father's hands and watched it himself, feeling his stomach drop. "Oh my God," Patricia was sobbing. "Oh my God, they have her. They have our baby." "Call the police," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Call 911. Call the FBI. Call everyone." Within 15 minutes, 2 Westfield police officers arrived at the Thompson home. They watched the video and immediately contacted their department's detective division. Within an hour, the FBI's Indianapolis field office had been notified. By 4:00 a.m., a special agent named Marcus Chen from the FBI's International Operations Division was on the phone with Michael Thompson, getting details about Rebecca's trip and the ransom demand. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Chen said in a calm, professional voice, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your daughter has been kidnapped by an organized criminal group operating in Nigeria. These groups specialize in luring Americans to Lagos through romance scams and then holding them for ransom. The good news is that these groups almost always release their victims after payment. They are criminals, but they are businessmen. Dead hostages are bad for business. The bad news is that you are facing a very difficult decision about whether to pay the ransom." "What do you mean, whether to pay?" Patricia said, her voice rising. "Of course we're going to pay. They have our daughter." Agent Chen sighed. "The FBI's official policy is that we do not encourage the payment of ransoms to criminal organizations. Payment funds future criminal activity and creates incentives for more kidnappings. However," he paused, "I also understand that you are parents facing an impossible situation. Whatever you decide, the FBI will work with Nigerian authorities to try to locate and rescue your daughter." "Can you rescue her?" Michael asked desperately. "We will try," Agent Chen said. "But I need to be honest with you. Coordination with Nigerian law enforcement is challenging. Corruption is widespread. These criminal networks are sophisticated and have safe houses all over Lagos. Finding your daughter before the ransom deadline may not be possible." "So, what do we do?" Daniel asked. "First, don't respond to the kidnappers yet," Agent Chen instructed. "Let them wait a little while. They expect negotiation. Second, document everything they send you, every message, every video, every communication. Third, start gathering information about what you could realistically raise if you decide to pay. Fourth, let the FBI and the State Department work with Nigerian authorities to see if we can locate Rebecca through investigation." The next several days were agony for the Thompson family. More videos arrived from Rebecca's captors, each one showing her looking more desperate and frightened. The kidnappers sent text messages from her phone with payment instructions. They wanted the ransom paid in Bitcoin to an anonymous wallet address. They provided detailed instructions on how to purchase cryptocurrency and transfer it. Agent Chen worked with the family to establish a communication strategy. The goal was to keep the kidnappers engaged while buying time for any possible investigation to make progress. Michael was coached to respond to the kidnappers' messages with requests for proof that Rebecca was alive and well. He asked for photos of her holding current newspapers. He asked for specific messages that only Rebecca would know to say. The kidnappers complied with these requests, sending new photos and videos every day or two. The negotiations over the ransom amount began on day 3. Michael sent a message explaining that the family simply did not have $150,000 and could not possibly raise that amount. The kidnappers responded angrily, threatening harm to Rebecca if the family didn't take the demand seriously. But over the following days, as Michael continued to insist the amount was impossible, the kidnappers began to lower their demand, first to $100,000, then to $75,000. Meanwhile, word of Rebecca's kidnapping had spread through Westfield. Her disappearance became local and then regional news. The story of a small-town teacher lured to Nigeria through an online romance and then kidnapped struck a chord with people. Westfield Intermediate School organized a vigil where hundreds of community members gathered to pray for Rebecca's safe return. Students created cards and drawings with messages of hope. A GoFundMe campaign was started to help the family raise ransom money if they decided to pay. Amanda Martinez became the family's liaison to the community support efforts. She coordinated with the school, local churches, and media to keep pressure on authorities to do everything possible to rescue Rebecca. The local news stations picked up the story, then regional outlets, and eventually some national coverage. The attention created political pressure, which Agent Chen explained could be helpful in motivating Nigerian authorities to treat this case seriously. Daniel Thompson spent hours researching Bitcoin, trying to understand how the payment would actually work if they decided to go that route. He discovered that the anonymity of cryptocurrency made it almost impossible to trace or recover funds once transferred. He also learned about the difficulty of converting large amounts of cash into Bitcoin quickly, the various exchanges and verification requirements, the transaction fees, and timing issues. On day 5 of Rebecca's captivity, the family received what seemed like good news. Agent Chen called to say that Nigerian police believed they had identified the criminal network responsible. A raid was being planned on a warehouse in the Ajagunle district where they believed Rebecca might be held. But the operation required careful coordination and couldn't happen immediately. The plan was to execute it on day 8, giving them time to gather intelligence and plan properly. But by day 7, the kidnappers' deadline, the raid had not yet occurred. The Thompson family faced their impossible decision. The kidnappers' latest demand was $75,000. The GoFundMe campaign had raised almost $40,000. Michael and Patricia could access another $30,000 from retirement accounts, though doing so would trigger massive tax penalties. They could potentially borrow another $15,000 from family members. Combined with some savings, they could probably get to $75,000, but it would financially devastate them. Agent Chen's official position remained that they should not pay, but he also said, off the record, that he understood if they felt they had no choice. Michael and Patricia spent an agonizing night discussing what to do: pay and possibly save their daughter but fund criminal activity and ensure Rebecca's kidnappers went free to victimize others, or refuse to pay, trust that a raid that might not happen would somehow save her, and risk the consequences of the kidnappers following through on their threats. In the end, love outweighed every other consideration. On the morning of day 8, Michael Thompson sent a message to the kidnappers through Rebecca's phone. "We can raise $75,000. We need detailed instructions on how to make the payment. We need proof that Rebecca will be immediately released once payment is made." The kidnappers responded within an hour. "Provide the Bitcoin wallet address we sent previously. Once the transaction is confirmed on the blockchain, we will provide you with the location where Rebecca will be released. She will be dropped at a public location within 4 hours of payment confirmation." But before the Thompson family could execute the payment, they received an urgent call from Agent Chen. "Don't pay yet," he said. "The raid is happening in 3 hours. Nigerian police have confirmed the location. They have the warehouse surrounded. We're going to try to get her out." Michael was torn. What if the raid fails? What if they hurt her? "I can't make this decision for you," Agent Chen said. "But if we can rescue her without paying, that's obviously the best outcome for everyone. These kidnappers will be arrested instead of rewarded, and your money stays with your family." "How confident are you the raid will work?" Michael asked. "Nothing is certain," Agent Chen admitted. "But Nigerian police believe they have good intelligence. The raid team is well trained. I think there's a real chance this works." Michael looked at his wife, at his son, at Amanda, who had come to be with the family during this horrible time. They all nodded. "Okay," Michael said to Agent Chen, "we wait for the raid. But if it doesn't work, we pay immediately. Our daughter comes first." No one slept that night as they waited for word about whether Rebecca Thompson would be rescued or whether they would be burying their daughter. The raid that would end Rebecca Thompson's 11-day nightmare in captivity began in the early morning hours of March 25, 2019. For Nigerian authorities, this operation represented a rare opportunity to strike a significant blow against one of the organized criminal networks that had been operating with virtual impunity in Lagos for years. The case had drawn international attention, with pressure from the US, Embassy and State Department intensifying each day that Rebecca remained missing. For the tactical team that would execute the rescue, it was a high-stakes operation where any mistake could result in a hostage's death and an international incident. The intelligence that led to the raid had been gathered through multiple sources over the previous week. Emmanuel Okafor, the man who had posed as David Thompson, had been the weak link in the organization's operational security. On day 5 of Rebecca's captivity, Nigerian police had raided the internet cafe at 23 Awolowo Road in Ikeja, based on a tip from an informant who had heard about the American teacher's kidnapping. When they stormed the back room that Emmanuel used for his scamming operations, they found him logged into multiple dating profiles and in the middle of conversations with several potential victims. Emmanuel had been arrested on the spot. His laptop and phones were seized, providing investigators with a treasure trove of information. The devices contained detailed records of his communications with Rebecca going back 4 months, along with similar conversations with dozens of other women across the United States and Europe. There were files with photographs of potential victims, notes about their emotional vulnerabilities and financial situations, and scripts for the kinds of messages that worked best to build trust and affection. Most importantly, the police found communications between Emmanuel and other members of the kidnapping network. While Emmanuel tried to claim he was just running romance scams and had nothing to do with kidnapping, the messages on his phone told a different story. There were WhatsApp conversations with someone listed as Ibrahim Boss discussing Rebecca's arrival, her collection from the airport, and the ransom negotiations. Though the messages used coded language, their meaning was clear enough. Under interrogation, Emmanuel initially resisted cooperating, but after 2 days of questioning and the threat of being charged as a co-conspirator to kidnapping, which carried severe penalties in Nigeria, he began to provide information. He admitted that Ibrahim Yusuf was the leader of the kidnapping operation. He described the general area where captives were usually held, mentioning Ajagunle and Festac town as the 2 main locations. He provided physical descriptions of the other gang members and their roles. The breakthrough came when Emmanuel mentioned that Ibrahim had recently been complaining about problems with the warehouse in Ajagunle, something about the property owner demanding higher monthly payments. Emmanuel didn't know the exact address, but he knew it was an industrial area near Boundary Road. With this information, Nigerian police established surveillance of potential warehouse locations in that area. They identified several abandoned or rarely used warehouses and began monitoring them. On day 8, surveillance teams observed Victor Adeyemi arriving at a warehouse at 79 Boundary Road, carrying bags of what appeared to be food supplies. Additional observation throughout that day noted that someone was clearly occupying the warehouse. Lights were visible through cracks in the boarded windows. There were comings and goings of people who matched descriptions of gang members. This had to be where Rebecca was being held. But confirming location was only the first step. Planning a rescue operation in a dense urban environment where the kidnappers might kill their hostage rather than allow capture required careful strategy. The tactical team that would execute the raid was the Nigerian Police Special Anti-Robbery Squad, a unit with experience in high-risk operations against armed criminals. Their commander, Inspector General Adebayo Olumide, worked with FBI advisors to develop an operational plan. The strategy involved simultaneous entry from multiple points to prevent any gang members from escaping or harming Rebecca before being subdued. The warehouse had 3 entry points: a main vehicle door at the front, a personnel door on the east side, and a rear loading dock door. Teams would breach all 3 simultaneously at exactly 5:45 a.m., a time chosen because most people would be asleep and reaction times would be slower. The timing also meant conducting the operation while it was still dark, providing some cover for the assault teams to move into position without being easily observed. The briefing for the 20 officers involved in the raid took place at 3:00 a.m. at a police station several miles from the target location. Inspector Olumide was clear about the primary objective: get the American woman out alive. Everything else is secondary. If you have to let some of the kidnappers escape to protect her, so be it. But our job is to bring her home to her family. 2 FBI observers, including Agent Marcus Chen, who had flown to Lagos the previous day, were present, but would not participate in the actual raid. They provided information about Rebecca, her likely physical and mental state after 11 days of captivity, and advice on how to reassure her that she was being rescued rather than experiencing another form of attack. At 4:30 a.m., the tactical teams began moving into position around the warehouse. They approached on foot, using darkness and the cover of nearby buildings to avoid detection. Snipers took positions on rooftops with views of the warehouse exits, though their orders were to shoot only if absolutely necessary to protect the hostage or other officers. The entry teams assembled at their designated breach points, checking weapons and equipment one final time. Inside the warehouse, Ibrahim Yusuf, Tunde Bakare, and Chioma Nwosu were asleep in the main area, having been up late into the night discussing the ransom negotiations and planning what to do if the American family didn't pay. Victor Adeyemi had left earlier in the evening and wasn't present. Rebecca was locked in her small room in the back of the warehouse, having finally fallen into an exhausted sleep around 2:00 a.m. after another day of anxiety and fear. At exactly 5:45 a.m., the raid began with explosive precision. The 3 breach teams hit all the entry points simultaneously. The front vehicle door was breached with a battering ram. The side personnel door was kicked in by 2 officers. The rear loading dock door, which was actually just old plywood covering an opening, was torn away. Officers in black tactical gear poured into the warehouse from all 3 directions, shouting commands in both English and Yoruba. "Police, get down. Get on the ground now." Ibrahim woke to chaos and confusion. His first instinct was to reach for the pistol he kept under the cushion of the couch where he had been sleeping. But 2 officers were on him before he could grasp it. He was slammed face down on the concrete floor, hands yanked behind his back, zip ties securing his wrists. Tunde, sleeping nearby, tried to run for the back of the warehouse but was tackled by 3 officers who drove him to the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Chioma, waking to the sound of shouting and seeing men with guns everywhere, simply put her hands up and dropped to her knees, screaming that she surrendered. She was detained quickly and efficiently, hands secured behind her back, searched for weapons, then left on the floor under guard while other officers continued to secure the building. Rebecca woke to the sound of shouting and didn't immediately understand what was happening. Her first thought was that something had gone wrong with the kidnapping, that the gang members were fighting among themselves, or that other criminals were attacking them. Then she heard the word police shouted in English and felt a surge of hope so intense it was almost painful. The team assigned to locate and extract the hostage had been given Rebecca's description and a likely location in the back of the warehouse based on Emmanuel's information about how the gang typically held captives. They found the locked door quickly. One officer shouted through it in English, "Rebecca Thompson, American woman. We are Nigerian police. Step away from the door." Rebecca scrambled off the bed and pressed herself against the far wall. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. They were here. Police were here. She was going to be rescued. Or was this another trick? Another manipulation? She was so confused and frightened she couldn't think clearly. The door was kicked in after 3 hard strikes. 2 officers entered with weapons drawn, quickly sweeping the small room to ensure there were no threats. Then one of them, a young officer whose name tag read Okonkwo, lowered his weapon and approached Rebecca carefully. "Miss Thompson," he said in accented English, "we are police. You are safe now. We are taking you out of here." Rebecca collapsed against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor as tears poured down her face. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Oh, thank you, thank you." Officer Okonkwo helped her to her feet gently. "Can you walk? We need to move quickly. Get you to safety." Yes, I can walk," Rebecca managed to say. She was escorted out of the room with an officer on each side, supporting her because her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. As they walked through the main warehouse area, she saw Ibrahim face down on the floor in zip ties, saw Tunde and Chioma similarly restrained, saw officers everywhere securing the scene and collecting evidence. It was real. This was really happening. She was being rescued. A police van was waiting outside the warehouse. Rebecca was helped into it along with 2 female officers who would accompany her. As the van pulled away from the warehouse, Rebecca looked back at the building where she had spent 11 days that had felt like 11 years. She was leaving that nightmare behind. She was going home. The van took her to Lagos University Teaching Hospital, where a medical team was waiting. She was examined by doctors who checked for injuries, dehydration, and signs of abuse. Physically, she was relatively unharmed aside from some weight loss, dehydration, and stress-related symptoms. But psychologically, the trauma was evident. She was shaking constantly, crying without being able to stop, having difficulty processing that she was actually safe. At 7 a.m. Lagos time, which was 2 a.m. in Indiana, Agent Marcus Chen called Michael Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, we have your daughter. The raid was successful. Rebecca is safe. She's at a hospital in Lagos being examined, but the doctors say she's going to be okay. You can talk to her in about an hour once they're finished with the initial medical assessment." Michael broke down crying, unable to speak. Patricia grabbed the phone from him. "Is she really okay?" she asked through her own tears. "Is my baby really safe?" "Yes, Mom," Agent Chen confirmed. "She's been through hell, but she's alive and she's safe. She'll be coming home soon." The news spread quickly. Daniel called Amanda. Amanda began texting everyone in their friend group and the community support network. Within an hour, Westfield Intermediate School knew their teacher was safe. The local news picked up the story. By midday, Rebecca Thompson's rescue was national news, a rare positive ending to a story about international kidnapping. In Lagos, all 5 members of the kidnapping network were in custody. Ibrahim, Tunde, and Chioma had been arrested at the warehouse. Victor Adeyemi was picked up at his residence at 88 Surulere Way hours after the raid. Emmanuel Okafor was already in custody from his earlier arrest. All 5 were facing serious charges including kidnapping, conspiracy, extortion, and operating a criminal enterprise. When Rebecca was finally able to speak to her parents on the phone, she could barely get words out through her sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have listened to you. I was so stupid." "You're not stupid, sweetheart," Patricia said, crying as hard as her daughter. "You just wanted to find love. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just so grateful you're safe." "When am I coming home?" Rebecca asked. "Soon, honey," Michael said. "The embassy is working on getting you on a flight, probably in the next day or two. We'll be there when you land." For Rebecca, the next 3 days in Lagos passed in a blur. She gave detailed statements to both Nigerian police and FBI investigators about her kidnapping, describing every member of the gang, every location she had seen, every detail she could remember. She identified all 5 gang members from photographs. Her testimony would be crucial in prosecuting them. The FBI worked with the US Embassy to expedite her departure from Nigeria. On March 28th, 13 days after she had arrived expecting to meet the love of her life, Rebecca Thompson boarded a flight from Lagos to Chicago. She was accompanied by Agent Marcus Chen and a State Department official who would ensure her safe passage through customs and immigration. The flight back was nothing like the excited journey that had brought her to Nigeria. Rebecca sat in her window seat and stared out at the clouds below, trying to process everything that had happened. She had been manipulated, betrayed, kidnapped, held for ransom, and traumatized in ways she was only beginning to understand. The man she had loved didn't exist. The relationship that had meant everything to her had been fiction. She had nearly died thousands of miles from home because she had been desperate enough for connection that she had ignored every warning sign. When the plane landed at O'Hare on March 29th, Rebecca's parents and brother were waiting at the international arrivals area. The moment Rebecca walked through the doors and saw them, she ran into their arms and they held each other, crying for what felt like forever. She was home. She was safe. But nothing would ever be quite the same again. The legal proceedings against the 5 members of the kidnapping network moved forward with surprising speed for the Nigerian justice system, largely because of the international attention the case had received and the pressure from American authorities to see the criminals prosecuted fully. The arraignment hearings took place in early April 2019, just 2 weeks after Rebecca's rescue. All 5 defendants, Emmanuel Okafor, Ibrahim Yusuf, Victor Adeyemi, Tunde Bakare, and Chioma Nwosu, appeared in the Lagos State High Court to hear the charges against them and enter their pleas. The charges were extensive and serious. Each defendant faced counts of kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, extortion, fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise. Emmanuel faced additional charges of wire fraud and computer-related crimes for his role in creating the false online identity and luring Rebecca to Nigeria. The potential sentences ranged from 20 years to life imprisonment depending on the specific charges and the defendant. When asked to enter pleas, all 5 defendants pleaded not guilty, though the evidence against them was overwhelming. The prosecution had Emmanuel's laptop and phones containing detailed records of his communications with Rebecca and his coordination with the other gang members. They had the warehouse where Rebecca had been held, with her fingerprints and DNA throughout the prisoner room. They had surveillance footage from the airport showing Victor and Chioma collecting Rebecca. They had Rebecca's testimony identifying all 5 defendants and describing their roles in her kidnapping. They had the videos and messages the gang had sent to her family demanding ransom. The evidence was so complete that legal observers predicted the trial would be relatively straightforward. But there were complications. The Nigerian legal system, like many systems in developing countries, suffered from chronic delays, overcrowded courts, and limited resources. Defense attorneys, particularly for defendants with money like Ibrahim, who had profited significantly from years of kidnapping, could exploit procedural rules to drag out proceedings. There was also the ever-present problem of corruption. While this case had too much international attention for blatant interference, there were concerns that subtle forms of influence might affect the process. Recognizing these challenges, the prosecution moved aggressively to keep the case on track. Special Prosecutor Adewale Bakare, appointed specifically for this case due to its international implications, worked closely with FBI advisors and American legal observers to build an airtight case. Every piece of evidence was meticulously documented and authenticated. Witnesses were prepared thoroughly. Procedural requirements were followed exactly to prevent any basis for appeal or dismissal. The trial formally began in October 2019, 6 months after Rebecca's kidnapping. The prosecution's strategy was to present the case methodically, establishing each defendant's role in the conspiracy and demonstrating the extensive planning and execution of the crime. They called Nigerian police officers who had conducted the raid and arrested the defendants. They presented forensic evidence from Emmanuel's devices showing the entire digital trail of the romance scam. They introduced Rebecca's testimony through video deposition, sparing her the trauma of returning to Nigeria to testify in person, but allowing the court to hear her account directly. The video deposition was emotionally powerful. Rebecca, sitting in a conference room at the FBI's Indianapolis office with her attorney present, described in detail her 4 months of online communication with the person she believed was David Thompson. She explained how Emmanuel had manipulated her emotionally, identifying her vulnerabilities and exploiting them. She described the excitement and hope she felt flying to Lagos, believing she was meeting her soulmate. Then she recounted the horror of realizing she had been deceived when Victor and Kioma picked her up at the airport, the terrifying drive to the warehouse, her 11 days of captivity, the fear and despair she experienced. By the time Rebecca finished describing her ordeal, several people in the courtroom were visibly moved. Even the defense attorneys seemed affected, though they had a job to do and couldn't let emotion cloud their representation of the defendants. The video testimony lasted nearly 4 hours and provided the prosecution with exactly what they needed: a compelling victim narrative that put a human face on the crimes. The prosecution also called other witnesses who provided context about the broader criminal enterprise. They brought in investigators who had discovered evidence of the gang's previous kidnappings, presenting documentation of at least 6 other victims who had been held for ransom between 2016 and 2019. While these previous victims had all been released after payment, and most chose not to participate in the Nigerian legal proceedings, their cases demonstrated a pattern of behavior that established this was not an isolated incident, but a systematic operation. Financial experts testified about the cryptocurrency transactions used to collect ransoms, tracing Bitcoin payments through various exchanges and wallets. While the money itself had been successfully laundered and couldn't be recovered, the transaction records proved the financial infrastructure of the criminal enterprise. Bank records showed how the gang had converted cryptocurrency to cash, with amounts totaling over $600,000 across the documented cases. The defense strategy varied by defendant, but generally followed predictable patterns of trying to minimize individual culpability and shift blame to others. Emmanuel's attorneys argued that he was just running romance scams and had no knowledge that the women he was deceiving would be kidnapped. This argument fell apart quickly when the prosecution presented the WhatsApp messages between Emmanuel and Ibrahim, explicitly discussing Rebecca's collection from the airport and the ransom demands. The messages made it clear Emmanuel was a knowing participant in the kidnapping conspiracy, not just an independent scammer. Ibrahim's defense was more brazen. His attorneys argued that while Ibrahim had been present at the warehouse when the raid occurred, there was no proof he was in charge of the operation or that he had personally kidnapped anyone. This argument also failed when multiple witnesses testified about Ibrahim's leadership role. and when his own phone records showed him coordinating activities and making decisions about the ransom negotiations. Victor and Tunde's attorneys tried to portray their clients as low-level participants who were just following orders and didn't understand the full scope of the criminal enterprise. This might have generated some sympathy, except that their active participation in collecting Rebecca from the airport and holding her prisoner demonstrated clear knowledge and willing involvement in kidnapping. The most interesting defense came from Kioma's attorney. Recognizing the strength of the evidence against his client, the attorney negotiated a plea deal with prosecutors. Kioma agreed to provide detailed testimony about the gang's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her cooperation was valuable because she could describe the internal workings of the organization, including how victims were selected, how the airport collections were planned, how ransom negotiations were conducted, and how money was laundered. Kioma's testimony was devastating for the other defendants. Speaking calmly and without apparent emotion, she explained that the gang had developed a systematic approach to kidnapping, refined over years of practice. She described how Emmanuel would spend months grooming potential victims online, building trust and affection, while gathering information about their financial situations and social isolation. She explained the airport collection procedure, how Victor would approach victims with a believable story, while she provided reassurance through her female presence. She detailed the warehouse operations, the conditions in which captives were held, the methods used to pressure families into paying ransoms. When asked why she had participated in kidnapping, Kioma was matter-of-fact. "I needed money," she said. "I come from very poor family in Delta State. No education, no opportunities. Ibrahim offered me work that paid more in 1 month than I could earn in a year doing legitimate work. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway, because I needed to survive." Her honesty was striking, but it also made clear that this was premeditated criminal activity, not some desperate act of survival. The prosecution used her testimony to demonstrate that the entire gang had operated with full knowledge of what they were doing, and no concern for the trauma they were inflicting on their victims. The trial lasted 6 weeks, much faster than most complex criminal cases in Nigeria. The evidence was so overwhelming and well presented that the defense had little room to maneuver. In early December 2019, after just 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all 5 defendants. The sentencing hearing took place a week later. Nigerian law allowed for substantial penalties for kidnapping, particularly in cases involving foreign nationals. Prosecutor Bakare argued for maximum sentences, pointing out that the defendants had operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had traumatized multiple victims and damaged Nigeria's international reputation. The judge, Justice Olufemi Adeyemi, delivered sentences that reflected the severity of the crimes. Emmanuel Okafor received 25 years in prison without possibility of parole. The judge noted that Emmanuel's role in creating the elaborate deception that lured Rebecca to Nigeria made him a critical component of the conspiracy. Ibrahim Yusuf, as the leader of the operation, received 30 years in prison without parole. The judge's sentencing statement emphasized that Ibrahim had orchestrated a criminal enterprise that systematically targeted vulnerable people for financial exploitation. Victor Adeyemi received 22 years without parole for his role in collecting Rebecca from the airport and imprisoning her. Tunde Bakare received 20 years for his participation as driver and logistics coordinator. Chioma Nwosu, because of her cooperation with prosecutors, received a reduced sentence of 12 years, though still without possibility of parole. The judge acknowledged her assistance to the prosecution, but noted that she had still willingly participated in serious crimes that caused tremendous harm. In addition to the prison sentences, the judge ordered asset forfeiture of all property and funds that could be traced to the criminal enterprise. Bank accounts were seized, vehicles were confiscated, and a monetary restitution order of $75,000 was issued in favor of Rebecca Thompson, though legal experts acknowledged that actually collecting this restitution would be extremely difficult, given that most of the gang's profits had been successfully laundered and hidden. All 5 defendants filed appeals, as was their right under Nigerian law, but the appeals were denied in 2020. The convictions and sentences stood. For the first time in years, a major kidnapping network operating in Lagos had been completely dismantled, and its members would spend decades in prison. The case sent a message, though whether it would actually deter future criminals remained uncertain. For Rebecca Thompson, watching the sentencing via video link from Indiana, there was a sense of relief but not real satisfaction. These people would be in prison, which was good. They wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else, but justice in a courtroom couldn't undo what had been done to her. It couldn't erase the trauma, couldn't restore her ability to trust, couldn't give her back the innocence and hope she had carried with her onto that flight to Lagos. The people who had destroyed her sense of safety in the world would pay a price, but she would be paying a price too, for the rest of her life. The long-term consequences of Rebecca Thompson's 11-day nightmare in Lagos extended far beyond the courtroom verdicts. In the 2 years following her rescue, Rebecca struggled with severe psychological trauma that affected every aspect of her life. She had developed acute stress disorder in the immediate aftermath of the kidnapping, which evolved into full post-traumatic stress disorder as months passed. The symptoms were debilitating. She experienced frequent panic attacks triggered by seemingly random things: seeing someone who resembled one of her kidnappers, hearing accented English that sounded like Victor's voice, driving past industrial buildings that reminded her of the warehouse. Her sleep was destroyed by recurring nightmares. She would dream she was back in that concrete room, hearing the lock click, feeling the walls closing in. She would dream that the rescue had never happened, that she was still waiting in the darkness for someone to save her. She would wake up screaming, her heart pounding, unable to distinguish dream from reality for several terrifying moments. The nightmares became so frequent and intense that she was afraid to sleep, leading to severe insomnia that left her exhausted and unable to function normally. She developed claustrophobia so severe that she couldn't enter elevators or small rooms without experiencing overwhelming panic. Movie theaters, crowded stores, even her own car with the doors locked could trigger crushing anxiety. The independence she had taken for granted before the kidnapping evaporated. She was afraid to go anywhere alone, constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected noises, unable to relax even in familiar environments. Her ability to trust people had been fundamentally broken. The man she had loved, who had made her feel special and valued, had never existed. The friendly young couple who picked her up at the airport had been part of a criminal conspiracy. How could she ever trust her judgment about people again? How could she believe anything anyone told her? This inability to trust extended even to people she had known for years. She found herself questioning the motives of friends and colleagues, wondering if their kindness was genuine or if they were manipulating her for some purpose she couldn't see. Rebecca initially tried to return to teaching at Westfield Intermediate School in September 2019, 5 months after her ordeal. The school administration and her colleagues were supportive, welcoming her back and trying to create a comfortable environment. But being in the classroom proved overwhelming. She couldn't focus on lesson plans. She couldn't be the warm, engaged teacher her students needed. She would find herself staring out the window, dissociating from her surroundings, lost in memories of the warehouse. After just 3 weeks, she had to take a leave of absence. The financial impact of her kidnapping was also significant, though not in the way it might have been if her family had paid the ransom. Rebecca had medical bills from her initial treatment in Lagos and ongoing therapy costs in Indiana. She had lost nearly 6 months of salary between the time she was kidnapped and when she tried to return to work. The legal fees associated with her testimony in the Nigerian trial and related matters added up. The GoFundMe campaign that had been started to potentially pay her ransom had raised about $40,000, and this money was redirected to help cover her recovery expenses, but it wasn't nearly enough. More devastating than the financial costs was the loss of her career satisfaction. Rebecca had defined herself as a teacher for 12 years. It was her identity, her purpose, the thing that gave her life meaning. Being unable to perform that role left her feeling lost and worthless. She spent days lying on the couch in her parents' house, where she had moved after giving up her apartment, unable to muster the energy or motivation to do anything productive. Depression settled over her like a heavy blanket she couldn't throw off. Her family tried desperately to help. Patricia reduced her hours at the hospital to spend more time with Rebecca. Michael did endless research on trauma recovery and PTSD treatment options. Daniel visited multiple times a week, bringing groceries, taking Rebecca to therapy appointments, just sitting with her when she didn't want to be alone. Amanda continued to check in daily, though Rebecca often didn't answer calls or texts for days at a time. Therapy became the center of Rebecca's life. She worked with Dr. Sarah Patel, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery and PTSD. The therapy was grueling and painful. Rebecca had to confront what had happened to her over and over, processing the emotions, examining the thought patterns that had made her vulnerable, learning strategies to manage her symptoms. Some days she made progress. Other days she felt like she was sliding backward into darkness. Dr. Patel introduced Rebecca to other survivors of violent crimes and kidnapping through a support group. Meeting other people who had experienced similar trauma was both helpful and difficult. It was reassuring to know she wasn't alone in her struggles, that other people understood the specific ways trauma affected daily life. But it was also painful to hear their stories, to be confronted with the reality that terrible things happen to good people all the time, that the world was not the safe place she had believed it to be. One conversation in the support group stuck with Rebecca. A woman named Jennifer, who had been kidnapped in Mexico 5 years earlier, told the group something that resonated. "You can't go back to who you were before," she said. "That person doesn't exist anymore. The trauma changed you fundamentally. The work is not about getting back to your old self. It's about building a new self that can live with what happened." This realization was both devastating and liberating for Rebecca. She would never again be the naive, optimistic woman who boarded a flight to Lagos believing in fairy tale romance. That Rebecca had died in the warehouse. But maybe she could become someone new, someone stronger and wiser, someone who had survived the worst and could help others avoid similar fates. Slowly, painfully, Rebecca began to rebuild. In early 2021, nearly 2 years after her kidnapping, she felt ready to try working again. She wasn't ready to return to classroom teaching, but she was ready to do something. She approached Westfield Intermediate School with a proposal to develop a digital literacy program for students focusing on online safety, recognizing manipulation tactics, and protecting personal information. The administration enthusiastically supported the idea. Rebecca developed a curriculum teaching students about online predators, romance scams, catfishing, and other digital dangers. She created age-appropriate presentations explaining how criminals use psychological manipulation to build trust and exploit vulnerabilities. She taught students to verify identities, recognize red flags, and protect their personal information. The work was meaningful because it turned her trauma into something that could protect others. She also began speaking publicly about her experience. It started small, with a talk at a local church to their women's group about the dangers of online romance scams. But word spread about the kidnapped teacher from Westfield, who had survived and was willing to share her story. She was invited to speak at other churches, community centers, schools. The FBI asked her to participate in public awareness campaigns about international romance scams. Media outlets interviewed her for stories about online safety. The public speaking was terrifying at first, standing in front of audiences, making herself vulnerable by sharing the most painful experience of her life, reliving the trauma every time she told the story. But it was also therapeutic in a way therapy sessions alone couldn't be. Every time someone approached her after a presentation to say that her story had made them more cautious, or had helped them recognize a scam they were falling for, or had given them courage to leave an abusive situation, Rebecca felt like maybe there was purpose in what had happened to her. In May 2021, Rebecca published a memoir titled Betrayed by Hope, My Nigerian Nightmare. Writing the book had been part of her therapy, a way to process the entire experience from the first messages with David through the kidnapping, rescue, and recovery. The book was emotionally raw and honest, holding nothing back about her vulnerabilities, her mistakes, her suffering, and her ongoing struggles with PTSD and trust. It became a local bestseller in Indiana and gained national attention when it was featured on several true crime podcasts and book review platforms. The book's success brought more opportunities to speak and advocate. Rebecca partnered with non-profit organizations fighting human trafficking and online exploitation. She worked with the FBI's cyber division on educational materials about romance scams. She became a voice for victims, someone who could speak from experience about the psychological tactics predators use and the long-term impacts of trauma. By late 2021, Rebecca felt stable enough to attempt some traditional teaching again. She returned to Westfield Intermediate School part-time, teaching digital literacy and internet safety to 4th and 5th graders. Being back in a classroom with students was both healing and challenging. The kids' enthusiasm and hopefulness reminded her of who she had been before Lagos, but their innocence and trust also made her aware of how much she had lost. Her personal life remained complicated. She had tried dating a few times but found it nearly impossible to open up to potential partners. The vulnerability required for romantic relationships felt too dangerous. How could she trust anyone's intentions when she had been so completely deceived before? She went on a handful of dates with men introduced by friends, but inevitably her anxiety and distrust would sabotage any potential connection. She accepted that she might be single for a long time, possibly forever, and tried to find peace with that reality. 3 years after her kidnapping, in March 2022, Rebecca created a non-profit organization called Trust But Verify. The mission was to educate the public about online romance scams, provide support for victims, and advocate for stronger law enforcement action against international fraud networks. The organization developed educational materials distributed to schools, libraries, and community centers. They created online resources including videos, checklists, and guides for safely navigating online dating. They provided referrals to therapists and support groups for scam victims. Rebecca's work with Trust But Verify brought her into contact with hundreds of other victims of romance scams. She learned that her experience, while extreme because it ended in kidnapping, followed a pattern that affected thousands of Americans every year. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center reported that Americans lost over $139 million to romance scams in 2023 alone, and those were just the reported cases. The actual numbers were likely much higher because many victims were too ashamed to report what happened. Through her advocacy work, Rebecca pushed for policy changes. She lobbied for stronger requirements on dating platforms to verify user identities. She advocated for increased funding for international law enforcement cooperation to pursue romance scammers. She supported legislation that would allow U.S. prosecutors to charge Americans who acted as money mules for international scam operations. Progress was slow, but she felt like she was making a difference. By 2024, 5 years after her rescue, Rebecca had found a form of stability and purpose that felt sustainable. She still lived with her parents in Westfield, not because she couldn't afford her own place on her part-time teaching salary, supplemented by speaking fees and book royalties, but because being around family made her feel safer. She still struggled with PTSD symptoms, though they had decreased in frequency and intensity with continued therapy and medication. She had learned to manage her triggers and had developed coping strategies that allowed her to function relatively normally most days. She had a small circle of close friends who understood her limitations and loved her anyway. She had meaningful work that combined teaching, writing, and advocacy. She had the satisfaction of knowing that her story had prevented other people from becoming victims. She had survived something terrible and found a way to build a life on the other side of that trauma. Looking back, Rebecca could see how far she had come from the broken, terrified woman who had been rescued from a warehouse in Lagos. That rescue had saved her life, but the real rescue, the process of reclaiming herself from the trauma, had taken years and was still ongoing. She would never be the same person she was before, but she had become someone she could respect, someone who had taken the worst experience imaginable and transformed it into a mission to protect others. The warning signs she had ignored in her correspondence with David now seemed so obvious in retrospect. The reluctance to video chat regularly, the constant excuses about poor internet connectivity, the request for money, the insistence on meeting in Nigeria rather than anywhere else, the vague details about where he lived. But Rebecca had learned not to be too hard on herself about missing those signs. The scammers were professionals who had refined their techniques through thousands of victims. They knew exactly how to exploit normal human desires for love and connection. Her message to others was simple but hard-earned through suffering. Trust your instincts. If something seems too good to be true, investigate thoroughly before committing anything: money, travel, or emotions. Verify identities through video calls at varied times. Never send money to people you haven't met in person. Be especially cautious about online relationships that progress very quickly. And most importantly, listen to the people who love you when they express concerns. They can see red flags that you might miss when you're emotionally invested. Rebecca Thompson's story became a cautionary tale used in schools, churches, and community centers across America. But it was also a story of survival, resilience, and the determination to find meaning in trauma. She had been broken by her experience in Lagos, but she had also been transformed by it into someone stronger, wiser, and committed to ensuring that other vulnerable people didn't fall into the same trap that had nearly destroyed her. 5 years after Emmanuel Okafor began his deception, 5 years after Rebecca boarded that flight to Lagos full of hope and excitement, she stood in front of an audience at a women's safety conference in Indianapolis and told her story once more. As she spoke about the manipulation, the kidnapping, the rescue, and the long road to recovery, she saw recognition in the faces of women in the audience. Some were nodding as she described the warning signs they had seen in their own online relationships. Some were crying as they recognized how close they had come to a similar fate. At the end of her presentation, a young woman approached her, maybe 25 years old, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," the woman said. "I've been talking to someone online for 3 months. He says he's in Syria working as a contractor. He keeps asking when I can visit him. Your story, it made me realize." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Rebecca understood perfectly. "You just saved yourself a world of pain," Rebecca said gently, hugging the crying woman. "Trust your instincts. They're trying to tell you something important. As Rebecca drove home to Westfield that evening, she thought about all the people her story had reached, all the potential victims who had recognized the danger before it was too late, all the families who had been spared the nightmare her family had endured. The trauma she carried would never fully heal. The trust she had lost would never be completely restored. But her suffering had not been meaningless. She had turned her victimization into advocacy, her pain into protection for others. Rebecca Thompson had flown to Nigeria for her soulmate and found a kidnapping gang waiting at the airport. But she had also found, in the long aftermath of that horror, a purpose that had probably saved dozens or hundreds of other women from similar fates. In the end, while she would never be grateful for what happened to her, she had found a way to make it matter, and perhaps that was the best form of justice she could achieve.